Welcome to The Debate. Imagine for a moment that you are handed a blank check to save the entire world.
A literal blank check, unlimited resources.
Exactly. You are given unlimited resources, absolute global authority, and virtually no oversight whatsoever. You are tasked with devising this master plan to stop an unstoppable alien invasion. And your very first move, wielding this unprecedented power, is to demand a luxury lakeside estate.
Oh, and don't forget the cases of 30-year-old aged brandy.
Right, the brandy, and a global search for a woman who perfectly matches a romantic fantasy you've had since college.
I mean, it sounds completely absurd, almost like the premise of a cynical political satire or something.
It really does.
But in the context of the Trisolarian crisis, this wasn't a joke. This was the actual documented behavior of the man who ultimately held the fate of two entire civilizations in his hands.
Precisely. So today, we are examining the fascinating and honestly deeply contradictory character arc of Luo Ji from the Dark Forest. Now, for those familiar with the history, you know that when we first meet Luo Ji, he isn't some military genius or an ambitious leader.
Not at all.
He is an ordinary, easygoing, and frankly lazy professor. He dabbles in sociology and astronomy, throws together academic papers just to get by, and he actively avoids responsibility. He explicitly states he cares very little for the continuation of human civilization. Yet, following this fateful, kind of cryptic conversation with the astrophysicist Ye Wenji, he is thrust into the role of a Wallfacer.
And we really need to set the stage on why the Wallfacer project was humanity's most desperate gambit. Because the alien Trisolarans are on their way, but they've already sent their ultimate spies, right? The Sophons?
Right. The subatomic supercomputers.
Exactly. These things can unfold into higher dimensions, wrap around the Earth, and monitor every conversation, every written word, every digital file in real time. They've completely locked down our progress in theoretical physics. But there is exactly one place the Trisolarans cannot see.
The human mind.
Yes, because Trisolarans communicate through transparent thought. I mean, their brainwaves are literally visible light. The very concept of deception is totally alien to them. So the United Nations chooses 4 individuals to be Wallfacers, tasked with formulating secret defense strategies entirely within their own heads.
Which brings us to this massive paradox, and really the central question of our discourse today. 4 individuals are given this godlike power. 3 of them come up with intricate, militaristic master plans, and they just fail miserably. Luo Ji basically goes on a taxpayer-funded vacation, and yet he is the only one who succeeds.
He really does.
He transforms from a hedonistic academic into the most powerful man across 2 worlds. But why? My position is that Luo Ji's triumph is fundamentally a strategic and mathematical one. His success hinges on an unparalleled intellectual breakthrough. He was the only person to deduce the underlying rules of the universe, what is known as cosmic sociology.
Okay, but...
And his strategy, threatening to broadcast the location of the alien homeworld to the rest of the universe, was mathematically the only viable path to peace.
Well, I look at it from a completely different angle. The strategic plan was certainly brilliant, I'll give you that. But the plan itself only worked because of who Luo Ji was. The Trisolarans easily dismantled the other Wallfacers because those men were active, ambitious individuals. Their psychology made sense to a highly advanced, rational species.
Sure, they were predictable.
Highly predictable. Luo Ji, however, was genuinely lazy. His complete lack of a plan, his sheer hedonism, and his apparent abandonment of his duty baffled the aliens entirely. His psychology, what you might call weaponized apathy, was the impenetrable shield that allowed his strategy to survive.
To really unpack this, I think we need to look at the mechanics of the threat itself and contrast Luo Ji's ultimate strategy with the failed strategies of his peers. Let's look at Manuel Rey Diaz.
The former president of Venezuela. Right, a fellow Wallfacer. Rey Diaz also planned a form of mutually assured destruction. His strategy involved detonating stellar-scale hydrogen bombs on the planet Mercury to slow its orbit, eventually causing it to crash into the sun.
A massive, terrifying plan.
Terrifying, yes. It would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy our entire solar system. He basically wanted to hold the solar system hostage. But the Trisolarans simply did not care. As Ray Diaz's Wallbreaker famously told him, the Lord does not care.
Yeah, that line gives me chills.
To the Trisolarans, the destruction of Earth's solar system was a severe inconvenience, but not an existential threat. If Earth was destroyed, their fleet would just have to endure a longer journey through the freezing void to find another habitable system. Ray Diaz failed because his threat only encompassed the prize, not the enemy.
I see the distinction you're drawing there.
Luo Ji's plan was fundamentally different. By threatening to broadcast the coordinates of the Trisolaran homeworld to the dark forest of the universe, he put Trisolars itself in the crosshairs. That is a structural superiority in the scope of the threat.
Look, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. I have to push back on the idea that the target of the threat was the primary reason for success versus failure. The reason Ray Diaz failed wasn't just his target. It was execution and feasibility.
How so?
Ray Diaz was actively building things. He demanded massive amounts of resources. He was testing unprecedented nuclear devices. He was physically manifesting his intentions in the real world. The Sophons, which monitor physical reality, watched every single action he took.
Well, they couldn't read his mind, though.
They didn't need to. That physical footprint allowed his Wallbreaker to easily deduce his true intent. Luo Ji succeeded because his plan required virtually zero resources. He didn't need to build a massive armada or develop complex neural implants or build stellar bombs. Luo Ji's plan was essentially one dude with a threat to make a phone call.
A very loud phone call, but yes.
Exactly. The mechanics of the threat are secondary to the fact that his plan left no physical footprint for the Sophons to track.
Wait, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective here, because I think the phone call analogy actually proves my side. Think of this dynamic like a hostage negotiation. Ray Diaz walked into the bank, strapped a bomb to the hostage, which is Earth, and threatened to blow the hostage up if the police didn't back off.
Right.
But the Trisolarians are negotiators who don't actually value the hostage's life above their own survival. They just want the bank. If the hostage dies, they just find another bank. Luo Ji, on the other hand, bypassed the hostage entirely. He managed to put a laser sight on the hostage taker's family back in their own home.
Okay, that's a fair analogy.
The Trisolarans surrendered because the scale and the specific target of the threat changed the game entirely. The execution was elegant, I will grant you, but without that specific strategic realization of cosmic sociology, all the stealth in the world wouldn't have saved humanity.
I entirely agree with the hostage analogy, but here is where I think your focus on the strategy misses the reality of the situation. How did he manage to hide that laser sight while he was setting it up? Having the ultimate threat only works if the enemy doesn't stop you before you arm the weapon.
Right. The Sophon surveillance.
Exactly. Now, if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, how could a highly advanced alien race be so easily fooled? This brings us to the Garden of Eden phase. Luo Ji hid this brilliant realization from the omniscient Sophons by genuinely not caring.
You really think he didn't care at all?
I do. When he was given Wallfacer status, he retreated to an isolated mountain lake. He drank wine, he enjoyed his fireplace, he admired the Louvre's Mona Lisa, and he fell deeply in love with Zhuang Yan. He wasn't playing four-dimensional chess to fool the aliens. He was literally just living a fantasy.
But that period wasn't just a vacation.
To him it was. The Trisolarians, being a species whose thoughts are instantly broadcast, possess a completely transparent psychological makeup. They simply could not compute a man tasked with saving the world who genuinely chose to ignore the apocalypse to live in luxury.
It was incomprehensible to them.
Completely. His utter lack of traditional ambition was the perfect camouflage. This is what I mean by strategic incompetence. If he had been a proactive, dutiful man, he would have started researching immediately. The Sophons would have noticed the direction of his thoughts, and they would have found a way to stop him.
That is a very compelling way to frame his psychology. But I see the Garden of Eden period not as mere hedonism, but as a necessary intellectual incubation. Let's look at the actual science he was trying to process. Luo Ji was handed two highly abstract axioms by Ji years earlier.
Right, at the graveyard.
Yes. First, survival is the primary need of civilization. Second, matter in the universe remains constant, while civilizations continuously expand. To deduce the entire dark forest theory, from those two simple statements requires an immense cognitive leap. He needed detachment from the global panic to do it.
You think he was actively working on this while he was out boating on the lake? Drinking aged wine?
I think his subconscious was doing the heavy lifting, yes. He had to synthesize those axioms with two massive concepts, the chain of suspicion and the technological explosion. Let me break those down naturally because they are crucial to understanding why his mind was the only one that could solve this.
Go for it.
The universe is huge, so communication is limited by the speed of light. If you discover another civilization, you can't just text them and say, "Hey, are you friendly?" By the time you get a response, centuries might have passed. You can never truly know if they are peaceful or hostile. That's the chain of suspicion.
Right. The infinite loop of, I think that he thinks that I think.
Exactly. Combine that with the technological explosion. Human history shows us that technology doesn't grow linearly, it explodes exponentially. A primitive world today could invent a universe-ending superweapon in a few centuries. Therefore, if you are a highly advanced civilization and you spot a weaker one, you cannot afford to leave them alone.
Because they might surpass you tomorrow.
Exactly. The only logical choice for any civilization to ensure its own survival is to shoot first and ask questions never. The universe is a dark forest full of armed hunters. The rest of the world, including the other Wallfacers, were caught in a frantic militaristic frenzy. Luo Ji's relaxed exterior allowed his mind the quiet space necessary to connect the dots of the Fermi paradox.
I mean, I see the logic.
Look at the moment he finally figures it out. He is walking alone at night, looking at the stars, and the pieces suddenly click together. That realization doesn't happen in a war room.
It doesn't happen in a war room, sure. But you have to admit his complete lack of a sense of duty was not an act. He explicitly tells his wife, Zhuang Yan, that he doesn't know why he was chosen and that he is just an ordinary man. He wasn't deliberately incubating a strategy. He was hiding from a responsibility he never asked for.
He was definitely reluctant.
Very reluctant. The only reason the Trisolarans issued assassination orders against him, like that orchestrated car crash that killed the woman standing next to him early on, was because they overheard his initial conversation with the UNG. They feared the potential of what he knew, but for years Luo Ji himself didn't understand his own value. His laziness wasn't a calculated incubation, it was a profound character flaw that accidentally saved him.
I'd push back on calling it purely an accident, though, because once he had the realization, he didn't just sit on it. He transitioned from passive observation to active, empirical, strategic validation. He cast a spell on a distant star system, 187 J3X1.
Oh, the spell.
And we should explain what that means, because casting a spell sounds like magic, but it's pure, terrifying physics. Using the sun as an amplifier to boost the signal, he broadcast the exact galactic coordinates of this random star out into the universe. He was essentially turning on a cosmic flare above that star system, signaling its location to anyone listening.
And then he just takes a nap for 200 years.
Right. He went into hibernation for nearly 2 centuries. When he awoke, humanity discovered that the star had indeed been destroyed by an unknown advanced civilization. The spell worked. This test proves that Luo Ji was functioning as a master strategist.
Yes, he tested the spell, and the mechanics of broadcasting coordinates to trigger a higher dimensional strike are fascinating. But let's look at what actually catalyzed his action. If Luo Ji was so comfortable doing nothing, what finally pushed him to act? It wasn't a sudden, noble embrace of his duty to humanity.
It was the UN.
Right! He acted because the United Nations Planetary Defense Council recognized his lethargy and forcibly placed his wife and child into cryogenic hibernation. They took them away to the future to force him to work. He was essentially blackmailed by his own species.
The intervention of the UN was the inciting incident to get him out of the chair, certainly. But upon seeing that star destroyed centuries later, Luo Ji genuinely grasped the horrific reality of the universe. This intellectual awakening transformed him. He realized that the survival of humanity rested entirely on his shoulders, and he embraced the heavy burden of duty. This is what allowed him to eventually become the sword holder. And we should definitely clarify for the listener just how desperate this moment is. The droplet is this incredibly dense, teardrop-shaped alien probe. When it arrives in our solar system, humanity sends out a fleet of 2,000 heavily armed warships to intercept it.
It's basically a victory parade. They think they've already won.
Right. And the droplet just rams right through them. It annihilates 2,000 ships in minutes like a bullet shooting through a pane of glass. Conventional human strategy was completely dead.
Exactly. Humanity is broken, and they think Luo Ji is a total fraud. They cast him out of society. So what does he do? He travels to a remote desert, digs his own grave with a shovel, and points a gun at his own heart. He has tied the trigger for an array of stellar bombs to his own vital signs. If he dies, the bombs detonate, the coordinates of Trisolaris are broadcast to the Dark Forest, and both worlds burn.
The ultimate dead man switch.
Yeah. His transformation into a cold, unyielding deterrence machine was fueled by personal heartbreak and isolation. The Trisolarians fundamentally underestimated the power of human irrationality. That a man would be willing to pull the pin on a grenade that destroys 2 solar systems just because he had been stripped of the life he wanted to live.
I hear that, but I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because I simply don't believe you can attribute his success as the sword holder solely to personal grievance. You don't sit in a concrete bunker for 50 years, staring at a blank wall with your finger on a doomsday button, purely out of spite.
I mean, 50 years is a long time to hold a grudge.
Exactly. During the deterrence era, he projects an aura of absolute, terrifying resolve. The Trisolarans calculate his probability of pressing the button at over 90%. You do not maintain that level of psychological resilience and terrifying credibility for half a century just to get your wife back. Even if his initial spark was selfish, the sheer psychological endurance he demonstrated proves a profound moral and ideological evolution. He internalized the brutal logic of the Dark Forest and became the ultimate guardian.
But did he evolve, or did he just weaponize his detachment? Think about his psychiatrist's observation early in the story regarding his love for his imaginary partner, which eventually led him to find Shuang Yan. Luo Ji possessed a rare, almost pathological ability to deeply manipulate his own psychological state.
He was a bit of a dreamer, sure.
He could blur the lines between fantasy and reality. When he sits in front of the Mona Lisa on Pluto much later in the timeline, it echoes his time in the Louvre with Xiang Yan. His internal world was always his primary reality. He didn't become a grand ideological guardian. He became a man who retreated so deeply into his own psychological fortress that the Trisolarans couldn't find a single crack to exploit. They couldn't predict him because his actions weren't governed by the logical preservation of the species, but by his own intensely personal parameters. That is why his laziness, his selfishness, and his capacity for irrational love were the ultimate weapons.
You describe it as retreating into a fortress, but I see it as ascending to a higher plane of strategic understanding. He realized that any outward display of traditional heroism or military mobilization was useless against the Trisolarans' technological superiority. Let's look at the setup of his final threat, the Snow Project.
Oh, right, the bombs in the dust clouds?
Yeah. He convinced the world he was setting up a network of nuclear bombs and space dust to track the movement of alien ships. But in reality, the explosions would create a cosmic Morse code transmitter, flickering the sun's light to broadcast the Trisolaran coordinates. He weaponized the very laws of the universe. His mind was the only place this strategy could be formulated without interference. But the strategy itself, the exploitation of the Dark Forest, is what secured the victory.
And yet, how does he execute the Snow Project? He intentionally makes it look like a desperate, flawed attempt to track the droplets. He leans into the public perception that he is a failure. He lets humanity throw rocks at his window and expel him from his neighborhood. He acts like a drunken, suicidal loser.
It was the perfect cover.
Exactly. It is his willingness to embrace a pathetic, deeply human failure that provides the cover for his masterstroke. If he had acted like a proud, brilliant strategist, the Trisolarians would have scrutinized the Snow Project and realized its true purpose as a broadcasting array. His perceived weakness was his greatest strength.
So we find ourselves looking at two distinct halves of a whole here. On one hand, I firmly maintain that Luo Ji's legacy rests on his unparalleled intellectual breakthrough. By discovering the dark forest theory and aiming the threat directly at Trisolaris rather than Earth, he formulated the only mathematically and strategically viable path to peace. It was an elegant, flawless application of game theory to the cosmos.
And I maintain that this flawless mathematical theory would never have survived the Sophon surveillance if it weren't housed in the mind of an unpredictable, flawed, and profoundly selfish human being. It was humanity's messy, irrational nature, our capacity for extreme laziness, our deeply personal grievances, and our fierce, selfish love that truly defeated the hyper-rational aliens.
It is a remarkable synthesis within the source material. The narrative beautifully blends cosmic scale, higher dimensional strategy with the most deeply intimate human flaws.
It really does. It forces us to ask whether our survival as a species depends on stripping away our humanity to become coldly rational, or leaning into the very irrationality that makes us human.
Exactly. It suggests that there is so much more to explore regarding human nature in the face of existential dread. Think back to that opening premise. You are handed a blank check to save the world. Perhaps the most profound strategy isn't to build a fleet of warships or a stellar bomb.
Right.
Perhaps the ultimate defense is to sit by a fire, pour a glass of aged wine, and wait for the universe to reveal its darkest secrets. Thank you for joining us on the debate, and we leave you to ponder in a dark forest. Is it the sharpest spear that saves you, or the ability to remain perfectly, unpredictably still?